So I want to welcome everyone here to what I'm going to call this one today, storms, and some more storms. And we're going to focus in on disaster procurement. I have a slide here, slideshow I'm going to share with you. I want to thank everybody for joining us both here live in the room where we'll be taking Q&A. So if you have any questions, you can actually start in our chat box and, maybe even introduce yourself a little bit. And if you have questions, you can type them there and I will come and review them just a little bit later. But first, I want to share with you the actual slideshow. So you can go in and one that was an edit option. We're going to change that. I don't want you to edit this one. Okay. Actually, that should be just viewer. Just to give you another one there. Oh, both of them say edit on it, but I think you just go in and just got the view option. That way you can go in there and check out these slides. If you want to have a copy of them, you can. I've got some great links that will take you to the appropriate spots in order to register for disaster procurement. And I'll explain some of those as we go along. Continue to let individuals in the room, just as a matter of just protocol, if you don't mind, maintaining your mute status unless you have a question. And then you can unmute yourself and ask the question. I'm certainly welcome to questions as we get into it. Can be a little bit more complicated subject. Okay. And what I'm going to share with you today is how to prepare yourself for disaster procurement, specifically as it relates to the federal government. But I'm also going to share with you some state and local information as we go into this. Oftentimes we forget, that we have multiple levels of governments and all of them have the ability to procure. The federal government is the one who traditionally funds disaster spending, and we're going to focus on those funds and how they flow to state governments, local governments, and even quasi-governments. So these are authorities that we set up to help us, oftentimes even to go in there and help us in a recovery mode. And in making sure you register with each of those in an appropriate way in this process here. And so I want to thank you all for coming this afternoon. So we're going to get started now. Primary purpose and objective today is to talk about disaster spending. GovSchool is a service of GovDirection. So in RFP delivery is the way we deliver our bids. So if you receive any of those brandings, we certainly appreciate your trust in us. We try to get this information to you as quickly as possible where we can. And apologize, I had a little bit of a time differential this morning and I messed up. And we initially had this scheduled for 10 instead of the 2, and I thought it was at the 2 p.m. slot. So that's why we had to make that adjustment. When you were talking about disaster spending, one thing you'll hear over and over again is the Thomas T. Stafford Disaster Relief and Emergency Assistance Act. Okay, this act was signed into law in 1988, and it amended an earlier act that dealt specifically with disaster relief and reframed the way we are out there and actually are funding and regulating disaster spending and how it flows through the various federal agencies to state and local. That I think a major part of that act was really requiring FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, to contract with businesses that are located in the affected area when feasible and practical. Okay, meaning that if you're localized during an emergency recovery specifically, or even preparedness, then you are given, put first in line to receive these types of contracts. But as you probably are aware, if you're located in a hurricane zone, which I grew up in one, and if you're the first to evacuate, so you're not really going to be there and on the ground and prepared to be able to actually respond to these contracts sometimes. So this shouldn't cause others to shy away, because it does require a whole of government effort to rebuild. We saw that in the latter part of 2022. We're already seeing a named storm now, 2 of them, in fact, already in June, which is so rare. But they're being prepared at every level of government, having the ability to quickly get, go out there and get in action in order to help and assist. It requires every single level of government and all our communities to do that. But this act, the Stafford Act, does govern how we are to interact with government between public and private sector. And that's important to understand, that we have a philosophy in the United States specifically where we want to engage private companies to assist in all levels of provisions of services. The governments are experts in traditionally in every item, so they look for you as a subject matter expert, and they want to make sure that there's a streamlined process during an emergency. And so the function of this particular act is I think that's the goal of that. And when you go in, if you're not familiar with FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulations, and it's available at acquisition.gov. That governs how we're going to interact in an emergency situation specifically, and how you get paid and things of this nature. So you should familiarize yourself and step into a FAR in order to do that. It's easy. I do a class specifically on FAR, but once again, don't shy away. It's organized very well. It's governmentese over and over again, but it is typically organized. I think I've found it to be so where if you're a private company, you should be able to understand and read through and have the ability to follow those rules and regs, because the government agencies will expect you to be familiar with them. Federal disaster contracting specifically, as I mentioned, contractors localize, but you also have to be registered in the appropriate federal database to be eligible for the award beforehand. Okay, and this is basically SAM now. SAM is the System for Award Management. It's more or less the accounts payable system for the federal government, but it allows you to go in there and register and get yourself prepared to receive a check, for lack of to help you understand how it really kind of works. It's not. They're not going to reach out to you. They're not going to, so you can be confused. A lot of times, even companies, there are companies out there really kind of feed on your lack of knowledge. You're not likely to be, to expire in the system. That's an email I get routinely. You just have to log in and update your information on an annualized basis. They want to make sure you keep it up to date. And so that's important, but it's a very simple process. So it's not like you can go in and re-registering as a whole. In fact, let's just go over. I'm a big believer in experiential learning. Let me just open up another window here, a tab, and we can go over to SAM so I can show you where you need to be at. SAM.gov, here we go. And here, always they'll refer you to the fact that it is, and highlight the fact that it is 100% free to register there. Okay, there's no cost to doing that. If you're paying someone $600 to $2,000, in fact, I see that I heard somebody the other day said they pay $2,000 to register stamp. It just really is not necessary. By the time you collect the information that's needed to give to a private company to register, you could have already been registered. It's a step-through process. It's organized very well, and it just takes you just a few minutes. If you do need somebody to assist you with that, just reach out to our staff, and we'll walk through that with you at no cost. It's a simple process, and we want to make sure you're registered correctly. But you have to be registered in the System for Award Management for disaster response. Okay, and then specifically with this registration, you're going to be asked if you want to be included in the disaster response registry, and you need to say yes. Okay, and that's pretty much the depth of complexity and how you actually register with them. It's just a matter of checking off the box. But if you're not, if you haven't checked that box, then you will not be eligible for disaster related spending, and you have to have that done before a contract is left. So you can't go back retroactively and to do that. Okay, so it's important that you get that in place. And you get started here to do that, or you renew your entity. It's just a matter of signing in and making sure it's your account. And then on the left hand side, there's going to be a part where it says update entity or add entity, and you just click on that, and your name of your company should come up, and you're able to go in there and update that. Okay. If you haven't registered in SAM, the typical stumbling blocks are basically the way you spell your company's name, or your officer's name, or your email address. These individuals will routinely type in the wrong email address or a typo, and that can cause you to have weeks and weeks and weeks of delays. You don't want to have that happen. Before you go in and register, make sure you have your local Secretary of State, how you were organized and how your name was set up for your company, because it needs to match exactly, okay, in order to make sure you don't have any issues in that process. Frankly, that's probably the most difficult part. And you should also have a copy of those organizing documents because they're going to ask you to upload some of those traditionally in order to make sure you can be validated. That takes really a day or so, if at the most. But you do go into a system where individuals have access to your emails and so forth. So you sometimes they'll come in. It's kind of not the best scruples, but you act almost like they're with the government or they're with SAM. They're not. If it's someone from SAM reaches out to you, which would be very rare, they would have a .gov address. Okay. Now, when you're going through there, you're also going to be asked for your cage code information. Now, the cage code is basically provides you with information about defense contracting. And they will reach out to you if there's an issue. So, and they also will give you a time-sensitive response period. So you have to respond within that time, or you're going to delay your entire registration again. So watch out for that. And that's traditionally only if there's an issue with your address. Your address should match what you have in your corporate information, and it's more of a validation process. But if they do reach out to you, it will be with a .mil or .gov address, so military or .government. Okay, so if it doesn't have those two, they're not an official source. Okay, so you certainly can use somebody, but when somebody who would want to try to fool me to make me think out there with the government and they're not, it would be I would really want to do business with them anyway. But when you go through there, you're going to choose that disaster response registry, and you'll find that it's somewhat easy enough to use. And if you do have a question on SAM registration, you can click here some of the questions and Q&A, and they have some short videos to show you how to actually do that. Very somewhat user-friendly system. I'm not a big fan of their bid service where you can go in and actually find federal government contracts. It's not the easiest and user-friendly. It's not near as user-friendly as what FBO.gov was. That was their predecessor. And even before then, they had a different system that was somewhat easier. We have an overlay that allows it's free to use at our site. All federal listings are completely free, and we just reach out and match you to them based on a number of provisions so that you can actually follow those. And those will include federal disaster response and disaster recovery type listings. As you probably are aware, there's really kind of three stages when we're dealing with disasters. One is preparedness, one is when it's actually happening, and one is post or remediation. And the different types of contracts that are there for you to respond to can be posted in different time frames. Usually preparedness will give you 30 so days to respond to them, as well as the post, because typically years even after the fact of a disaster, but funds are still there and they're being expended, but they give you a little bit more time to respond. In the immediate near term, almost always through the local emergency management groups, and those are all with very short time frames, oftentimes set up so that's a request for information or a source of salt, meaning they want to know that there's someone who can assist them in the area that they need help. Okay, even sometimes there's basically an open call, and you're asked to say, yes, I'm in this area, I can assist, and this is how I can assist in my company. And here's my UEI, unique entity ID, and here's my appropriate registration, and you're giving them that detail at that time. And those there, they can particularly just pick up the phone and call you based on their need for your services. Okay, so you have to be registered in SAM for the System for Award Management in order to receive these funds. In addition, the site itself, I have a picture of it here. It changes routinely, so they're adding and they're essentially pulling more and more federal services together at a one-stop location. And to me, that's kind of actually making it too complex. But it is there. That's the goal. That's the mission. And they've been doing that for years. So it'll change over time. Always know that the disaster response is going to be under the entity registration tab. Okay. And so that's what you really are watching for. And the contract opportunities, and once again, they don't alert you, but they're only SAM side, and you need to go in there and you can register. You can basically search by NAICS code, or you can search by a keyword. Sometimes I just use keyword hurricane or flood or disaster, and those will show those types of bids that are available. I would point out that even though FEMA will fund these projects or a federal agency, oftentimes they're let or the issue of the procurement is led by the local government or even a smaller subset of a local government in communities and quasi-governments who are receiving direct funding. So those bids and those issues are not going to be found in SAM. Local and state governments simply do not publish those calls for bids and proposals at SAM.gov. They're doing that on their own web location or their own newspaper or bulletin boards and different methods of alerting you. Gov directions and RFP delivery, we do pick up all of those listings for you so you can find them aggregated at our site. RFP delivery is a primary mechanism to actually deliver these bids now. In fact, you can go over there, rfpdelivery.com. And here, as we get closer to, I know just pointed out, we have a new app. That app is a great way to be alerted in your, without having to come to the actual website when you're out in the field. And just to point out that this is no longer tied to a time period as our daily alert comes to you every morning. Here you can, it's more when you use it, and it's going to alert you to all the new matches that that could be fit for your company. But when you do come in, we actually have an area called popular bids. And here we have storm cleanup and recovery, and there will be others like here's what emergency preparedness as we're preparing right now for a real active storm season. You will see those type bids, and you can just click on those at any given time and come in and see the listings that are there. People pointing you to the actual state that it's in and the due date. Okay. And so you can see those types of bids as well as the storm cleanup and recovery, going in and seeing those storm debris, for example, removal projects here in California. That's more of a, the different types of storms that are out there. It's just not hurricanes, but that's there. And other ways we can actually go in and actually search, and you can actually do a keyword. And you'll see, for example, name storms like you're looking for Ian or others, but I oftentimes just use the keyword hurricane search, and then it'll show me those active contracts now that are there for hurricane related activity. So here's one for hurricane shrub that's been there, that's out there, the landslide repairs, hurricane planning. Each of these, when you click through, we're going to tell you who the agency is, the due date, and the level of bids that it's at. For example, this is source of salt, meaning that here they're looking for companies who can provide this service, to provide the pre-hurricane planning. As you step in, the data itself is available to you. We tell you down to the office level. Now, this should mean something to you, but you can read into the actual bid to know this is going to be in Meridian, Mississippi area. There's going to be the local office in defense for this type of project, which I'll own you other details and who to contact and the contact information, but with its primary goal, getting you to leave us and going to the external source. In the meantime, always make sure you can download this on my PDF, or you can save it to your personal folder and come back and see, different stages of what's happening. And also, just so you don't lose it, we're adding about 1.5 million listings a year. So it's an active system where you can lose something. Going through, popping through to the actual bid here in this year, if it's funded by disaster recovery, then you're going to need, this is the Tyndall Air Force Base down there in Florida, then you're going to need to be registered appropriately to be able to bid on this. And when we're dealing with source of salt, they're looking more whether or not you're actually able to provide a service. Oftentimes they'll request just your capabilities and in the process. And it looks like here what they're wanting to do basically is that information, but very simple, just your name and address, your NAICS code, as well as your size and your cage code and your name and title, all the information you would have on your capability statement, but they'll have it in a different format. Sometimes even I've seen them when the RFIs are there, and this is like Chartabus here, but I would click through and I would be able to just fill in a Google form. So these are not something that's too complicated or formal, and they want you to be able to respond quickly without much to do about it. Okay, so I'm there, painting project down in Puerto Rico and so forth. You'll see these listings, and we organize them by those titles or by the NAICS codes themselves or by categories. We serve 197 industries at current stage. Here, for example, they're looking for a management consulting company to help them with energy vulnerabilities or hurricanes. So something a little bit unique. It's down in Georgia, but it's source of salt. See if there's somebody you can do that first. There, sometimes if you're the only one who responds, you can go straight to contract with those. Okay, if there's an active marketplace that responds, then oftentimes they will issue that solicitation or request for proposal in order to get you to get the information back. Here's one for Hurricane Ida that's been out there for a while. Another one getting ready for about to purchase generators. Upcoming, these are forecasting or pre-solicitation pieces of information. If it has the word upcoming, that means they're in the process of preparing this, but they haven't actually requested the bid or the document at this time. And so there you want to step in and do more traditional business development. Some of the rules are different. You're able to go ahead and reach out to them proactively, maybe, demonstrate product and have, as I teach about preparing your capability statement these days, make it interactive so that whenever somebody, if you do, for example, have generator, you might have somebody doing a short YouTube video and how this works. YouTube's our best friend these days. But make it easy for them to understand how you can fit their need in that community. And there's a Hurricane Irene project coming up that's there, and so forth. So those bids, they're easy enough to pull out at the state, local, and federal level. Only registrations required at the sam.gov. Okay, and of course this is the image of what the disaster response registry is going to look at. And I mentioned earlier about acquisition.gov. Here, when you go through at acquisition.gov, this is FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and they will drive you to different areas. Each of these should be easy enough to read through. They're mandated to have plain English discussion, and so it's tested for that. So you should be able to understand it. Something that you don't understand, then you should go to click through and follow through it to actually try to understand it. Here they'll check you through to the PTAC, or they've changed the name of those to, I think it's ATAP. But basically technical assistance centers that are funded by the Defense Department that can help you with various services that you might need in the community. And so the good organizations, you can find yours in your local area just by typing in the word PTAC still and your name of your city, and they'll tell you where that's at. I think it's always helpful to get those. Sometimes they can train you till you go out of business because you're not actually getting bids. And don't fall in that trap. You got to be responding and bidding. But easy enough follows through, shows you how to actually go through and register in acquisition.gov. And then within FEMA, they actually have an industry liaison form. So you'll go to FEMA.gov. I'm bouncing around there, and then you will email that to them once you complete that. Okay, and so this PDF. Let's see if I go in. There it is online, and I'm going to download that. Sometimes it is a fillable form, just basic information about your company. Some things that you would expect them to already have because you're in SAM and you've done the registration. But just in case you're not, you can go in there and you can fill that in. Oftentimes, where you do see the DUNS number in the past, and this could be an older form that I got linked here. There might be another one directly on there. So you need to check that out on the Department of Homeland Security within FEMA and just look for an industry liaison program and the profile. There you'll want to use your unique entity ID now. If you do have the DUNS number, you can still provide that. And notice that on the NAICS code here, they got a maximum of 5. You need to have your primary NAICS code defined. NAICS is a North American Industry Classification System. Okay, in the classifications themselves, you should have a primary. Okay, this is the primary one you want to identify with, but then you can have up to 5. I would take all 4, the additional 4. I'd take them. Okay, because you never know how a government classifying officer, procurement contracting officer is going to classify something. Now, state and local governments do not use the NAICS code system. They'll have their own coding system. So you just be aware that there's multiple coding systems that are out there. And frankly, these were all put in place before the advent of just simple keyword search. But they are at the federal level specifically used for set aside provisions. So if they are going to look at total small business, or they're going to look at woman-owned small business or veteran-owned small business, so they have to use the NAICS code even within the disaster spending to do that. So be able to do that, and then they ask you for those certifications that you might have. Okay, and some of these you may have not only within the federal level, but also within the state government level. Okay, this is actually a college or university as well. But the disadvantaged minority status, and I would also share with you that This is self-declaration, doesn't necessarily mean you have to have the certification, okay? But just all categories. But you can get some of these at the local level. And the certification is always good. I wouldn't sit back and really be overly concerned about them. If I am if I'm a veteran-owned small business or just a total small business, then I definitely want to make sure I'm identifying those, because those are routinely set aside. Those are the big ones, okay? And a lot of those are out there. But easy peasy to fill this out. Just make sure you fill it out and send it back if you're interested in federal procurement with FEMA. Okay. And as I mentioned, the state and local contracting, state and local government agencies control a large portion of disaster response activities. Okay, they are the ones who are on the ground responsible, and there for you to ask questions. You know, we actually have a really good state emergency management in Georgia. I'm here located in Georgia. I've worked there actually during storms and in the storm center when I was representing local governments there. And so they just really will go over and really try to help you. They just go over out of the way. And so never be afraid to contact them. They're there to really help you, and they do. Okay, so reach out directly, and you will find that they, especially when there's an emergency situation, that they'll be receptive to that. And then you must be also registered in the appropriate state or local databases to be oftentimes eligible for local and state contract awards. But you can do that as you're bidding. So it's not like this, not the same as at the federal. You have to pre-register. But if if there's a storm come through to the Gulf Coast region, I might, if I was in one of those states, I might go ahead and proactively register now and reach out and get used to that state's emergency management office, so I know where to go. Okay, and these are the individuals who engage with first responders. And so you really got a stage at that point where there has to be direct communication. It's not going to be here's a bid and you got 30 days to respond. It's going to be here's our need and we need for you to tell us if you can help us right away. And so you have to be ready with other types of pieces of collateral. For example, your capability statement. I'll go into that in just a second. That's very important there. Or just basically the basic information you're going to need to get back to them that's traditionally on your capability statement. Okay, so but have that in a form that you can get to them real quickly there. And then the FEMA regional offices are oftentimes the ones located near the disasters, in those individuals and other federal agencies too that are there. The Army Corps of Engineers and other types of agencies that can step in, Health and Human Services, the CDC, and others, depending on the level of the emergency. And they'll all, every time we've had a disaster recovery effort and also preparedness, it does require a whole of government effort, and they're responsible, and FEMA is the agencies responsible for coordinating that. Okay, at every level. In the state and local government, you'll find also, as you step into a county level, we traditionally have counties or parishes in the United States. There you'll have almost within everyone someone designated as the emergency management office or emergency management agency, just different titles, but they're responsible for coordinating at a county government level. Traditionally doesn't flow through to most cities. Some larger cities will have that office, but they're responsible for coordinating the county response to any kind of disaster. So you want to get to know, as soon as you know which county is going in, storm's going to happen in, and reach out, look at that county on the website, find out who the officer is. That'll be widely published, and you should be in contact with them if you're able to help in that localized community. Okay, get as local as you can when you're trying to help out in a disaster. And just know that in a more traditional RFPs and bids, you traditionally don't contact anybody. You follow those instructions that the local government has, the state government has, or the federal agency, and there might be one individual. That's not necessarily the same when there's an emergency. Okay, and make sure you get to that county's website. They'll tell you how to engage with anyone, or the state website, and then follow those engagement instructions when there's an emergency. It's just a different process. Now, the federal, you want to make sure you follow FAR, okay, and go through that what I just discussed with you earlier. And go through that, kind of really understand. They expect you to understand what they're talking about. They're not going to teach you. Okay, and so it's your responsibility. They'll reference the part of FAR that's going to apply, and it might be FAR 15.1, for example. Let's just go back over there. So if I went to FAR and they told me to be aware of FAR 15.1, I'd go over to the left hand side here. I'd click 15, and then I would drop down to 1. Okay, so that's the scope, right? In 0.001, see how they frame that as definitions. Okay, they'll always be very clear in how they're going to what words you're going to use. Okay, and if there's something unusual or word they need to define, they'll define it for you, so there's no misunderstanding. Okay, federal officers will not deviate from FAR. Okay? They expect you to understand it, and if you ever think that you can slip by it, you can't. Okay, it'll catch up with you. Okay, you got to follow the rules and regs according to FAR. And so a couple of those that are out there, I've got some links on this particular slideshow if you want to have, if you want to download it. There you would find here, for example, is Texas and Louisiana. I went ahead for today the ones that are kind of in the southeastern region in case there's a storm. This is, where we're looking at in the near future. Okay, at different times of the year, we're looking at California, Oregon, and also Washington State, so the West Coast, and then even inland in Colorado and others. And then we have, of course, the tornado valley, or excuse me, the locations where we find our tornadoes in alley, I normally call it, but now it's put all the way up to South Dakota, I think. So it's all over, it seems like. There was even one in LA, I think, recently. But you can go in there and you can look at the others. I have them all there, but all of them, you can just take the name of the state, and then you can go in and Google emergency management agency. Okay, it'll come up if you don't find it. So they'll drive you to those. But each of these you can click through and you can learn more about them, who it is, who it's there, and each of them are going to be organized almost all the same way. And that was basically by the types of first of all, what type of assistance they give. And the second is sort of the stage of the actual emergency situation. So planning, preparing, then doing, and then post remediation. Okay, it's just as I talked earlier. So it's these various stages. They're organized that way because that's primarily how the funds are organized that come down to them. Okay, in each of these, you will also find traditionally a way to get in touch with them, contacting them, following the press. And then what I would also do, if you're using any sort of social mechanism or social media, make sure you follow them on social media, because that is their primary way that they communicate during a disaster. So I follow all of the emergency management agencies on my Gov Directions Twitter account, and then we'll repost those as we see those. Okay, and just remember, they're in each state, they're also involved in different types of services. For example, in Georgia, there's also the Homeland Security Agency. And so it's been combined. So learn that structure. We do one class on the structure of government and decision-making processes, and how you need to understand who's really going to make that decision to hire you as a contractor, and how that's actually going to happen. So we do teach that. It is a decision-making in government is complex, okay, to say the least. And it's also oftentimes not logical. And so you have to come to understand that as a contractor with government. Okay, now I have put some easy to find references and images so you can see. They're a little bit dated. These here have the COVID pictures on them, but now most of them have dropped that. And now they'll be focused in, those images are going to be focused in on, and let's just see if I'm correct here. There's Texas. Let's go see what Texas is doing. They might be focused in on hurricanes now, or whatever the storm is or disaster is at the moment. Okay, so different. Now they're talking about heat. Okay, so they're dealing with heat, and so think out of the box too in terms of what governments are procuring when it comes to disasters. Disaster is widely defined, and you'll find just about every industry it can receive disaster contracts. And so be aware of that when you go into it. And they even give you, here it is, a great little resource of emergency managers to localize. So you know which county. You have Galveston County there. You want to know who it is. Okay, and so you can get in there if you can serve that area, and debris removal is huge, still going on all the time. It seems like there's contracts for debris removal on one side, and then debris removal monitoring on the other. They want somebody else to monitor it and make sure the work's actually getting done. In this particular case, they're organized by regions, so you want to go in and understand which regions that you can serve. within each of those communities. But know that they're changing their images on the front page routinely based on what the actual hurricane is. Okay, and what's going on. And you also will find it in this an active situation while it follow those press releases. I know last year when Florida was being impacted there more late, that Governor DeSantis was routinely issuing press releases explaining and changing as it went along to update what's happening, to keep you involved. These folks really go overboard to make sure it's done right. Because that's the last thing you're going to be criticized for as a local politician. And it's very important that they get it correct. I think it's Florida, South Carolina, but each of those will be receptive to you coming in and getting to know them. They'll have oftentimes have meetings for you to attend. It's sometimes now online where you can come learn more about these organizations. And like as I mentioned earlier, they'll be tweeting for you and knowing. And then they've also come up with various individual domain names. So, for example, I think in Florida it's like First Response or different ones. So you want to watch those as storms in various states that you might be actually located in, so you don't miss something as well. So it may not be on their main page, but then on a sub. So this one here is actually Florida Disaster.org. So this is actually the Emergency Management Agency, and then there's Florida Disaster. So they put everything centralized here for you to go in and actually read through it and find it. Okay. We'll also publish blogs at RFP Delivery when there's an active storm, leading you to the information, the latest information on any types of procurement that's going to be happening. Okay. Not to forget that there's other contracting sites that are out there beyond the emergency management agencies. And so the Army Corps of Engineers is a primary driver whenever there's anything dealing with dams or lakes, reservoirs. And so you can go and you can monitor bids on their site. We, of course, have those at GovDirections. We might drive you to their location, but they're actively involved in disaster remediation and preparedness. Okay, and so understand that, and they within their site, they'll talk about contracting and disasters. They even have one specifically for Puerto Rico, and they also have a small business area, the US ACE program. And so that's a contractor database you want to make sure you're aware of. They'll publish their forecast too, but not necessarily disaster in here, but contracting and disasters. As you step into this page here, a little bit more detail. And they even have the Emergency Management Agency points of contact too. I forget about that one there. But I'll go to that to make sure we got latest areas. Telling you how to register. And then if there's an active bid, the active bid section, they'll have it posted here where they're actually seeking you to help with specific items, and they'll list those one by one. Okay, so there'll be additional pages here they may add to it and highlight during that time. And we saw that during the hurricane, the last hurricane in Florida that was so damaging down there near Tampa Bay and Sarasota. So you have that there. And they'll also do with floods. You know, the flooding season is still happening along the Mississippi and other locations, and also then drought. We haven't seen much drought related issues lately, but there are dealing with other emergency operations that's there. Okay, and so understanding that, and worthwhile to go and check that page out. And then of course the quasi-government like the Red Cross, there you can go in and they will have needs, and oftentimes they're coordinating. Okay, so understand that they can be a player. The Small Business Administration Office of Disaster Assistance, also a player in understanding funding specifically and how to help you recover if you're in a disaster. But going in and really kind of learning how that all works. Okay, where there's a current disaster declaration and so forth. Okay, emergency preparedness. So use that site. Okay, Defense Logistics Agency, the DLA, is the world's largest buyer. And so if there's a lot of activity happening, they are going to be involved in some capacity. DLA, the bids are at DIBS, DIBBS. It's the Defense Industry Bulletin Board, I think, bulletin something. Let's see, but it's DIBBS, and there is Defense Enterprise Business System. Okay. Okay, Internet Bid Board System is what it stands for. But when you go in there, you're registered here when you get your KH code. But you can come in, you can watch those, and these are going to be smaller and medium-sized items. Oftentimes won't appear at sam.gov. We're picking up, those are all going to be within our website as well, Gov Directions, and delivered by RFP delivery. Okay. Then of course, SAM, System for Order Management. If you want to go into SAM and just work within SAM alone, you would go to sam.gov. Not a big fan of their search system, but I can search, hurricane, global words, come back, and it's going to give me some details. But you could typically organize quickly by due date, or this is, but it also mixed in with awards and other types of information. But then you can quickly find yourself in lost within different years. Okay, so be aware of that. So it's there, not necessarily reaching out to you, but you can come in there and you can monitor that. These bids are all, we have a direct API where these bids are actively in our system as well. Okay, here's that pre-hurricane planning source of salt that I just showed you a few minutes ago. Okay. And it's by the Department of the Air Force. And there we go. And so we also have the Department of Homeland Security Advanced Acquisition Planning System. This is where they will tell you what they're planning on doing in the upcoming years. And we pull that information in, and they also provide contracting assistance information. Okay. And then also prime contractors, we've got a link for those. These are oftentimes the federal government will want someone out the prime to organize the activities, and they'll have that prime given a large contract, and then they're responsible for coordinating with small businesses at that point. So come to understand that system as well. And so there we are with a number of different resources. I would just point out that one of the most important parts of disaster procurement is your capability statement. You need to have that ready to go. It's going to have to speak specifically to your executive summary, your differentiators, your performance, the NAICS codes, PSE codes assigned to you, and that you've chosen, any certifications that you have, and then your competencies. What are you good at? What do you actually do? This is a sample form for Gov Directions here in just for view. We do have a service that provides those, and we actually provide that as a complimentary service to anyone who purchases an annual subscription with us. We know you're going to be a player if you can take on that annual. And so we want to make sure you're ready for that. Okay, but you do need to have one. If you don't, we don't have to prepare it. You can prepare it yourself. It just needs to make sure you include these pieces of information. Nowadays, it needs to have what they refer to as pop, once the graphic designers, it needs to stand out. So you speak to them first as opposed to your competitors. It should also be interactive, making sure you can link through to your website, that you got secure links. And there's other types of important, if you got videos of what you do or your product, make it simple for them to be able to get to that point. Okay, even in the introduction doesn't need to be something fancy. It could be just a simple phone video where you talk about your company. It just makes them, it's more engaging. Okay, and you can link to those these days. Okay, and have that ready. Make sure you at least have your KH code and your UEI on it as well. So there we are. I want to see if there's any questions. I do have one over here. And so the question is, hello, can you tell me how to look and see when a contract is coming up on the FAR? Okay, just that's a clarification of language. If FAR is the Federal Acquisition Regulation. So acquisition.gov is basically this governs how governments are going to contract with you. Okay, so government contracting officers cannot do anything outside of FAR. These are the regulations. So they'll always refer back to that. And so whenever they do a bid, they're going to reference which part of FAR is a part of that. Okay, so you're to come back here and then take a look at that. Now, to actually look for a bid and see when one's coming up in sam.gov, okay, is one location. But of course, we have the same plus more information at rfpdelivery.com. Okay, at RFP Delivery, this is our primary delivery mechanism for bids. I can come in and I can search by just any keyword like hurricane Ida. Okay, that's one hurricane. That's our earlier. So we do that. Two words together, Boolean search technique. They have to appear together. If I use conjunctions, the words and, it's limiting, or it's actually expansive. Okay, so here all these bids have something to do with Hurricane Ida. There's 4 of them. Okay. Now this one here is actually upcoming. So this is to tell you what's coming up. It's going to be in Virginia, West Virginia, potentially. And then we have the roof replacement there from Hurricane Ida in Louisiana. That's an active bid, state and local. And so this one here is actually an award notice. Here, when I click through, I can actually see who won an award. Well, in that case there, I'm not logged in. I've already lost my login. So I have to log in, and then it will show me that information. Okay. The roof replacement, the active one. If I click on that one, it's also going to, let me just very quickly log in so I can show you what these bids actually look at. Okay. You going in, you got to be authenticated in the system. Coming in. And oh, let me go wrong one. So demo. I'm not sure if I got my demo account set up. I changed it earlier. We're testing it. See what I'm going to do. Go into my Google, log in through Google. That's going to be my Google account. Can use different one. As you can imagine, as someone who's actually using the system to check out a number of different passwords saved here. So here we go. So we go in and say, look, here I am, Mr. Knowles. Okay, it's going to tell me what membership I have. I have the regional service with the intelligence level. I mean, I can get awards and upcoming, okay, as well as active. Okay, so I go back in here and I'm going to look at Hurricane Ida. Go in and search that. Okay, I can also store that keyword. If I want to come back to it later, just save it right there. So here's the one for the roof replacement down there in Louisiana. And they're actually for the LaFourche Parish government. Okay, and so they're going to do is a Hurricane Ida damage repairs. It's been funded by those construction funds. Going in to actually see the bid. And at this point, you're working with that agency. You've left us, we've stepped out of the way, and you're going to follow the instructions for that individual agency. Here's the project manual, how you're going to bid on it. Got to have a bid back by July the 6th. Okay, now the other one, for example, you go from care, an award. And here, let's just step in, and there we're going to tell you who actually won the contract. So here's one for a rental of 23 commercial pads. And so when I step through, going in, I'll find out that Lionel Bailey won this contract down in Edgar, Louisiana, for $372,000 contract. Okay, and so we can find that those details, and that's from FEMA, and they provide these lease rooms. Now, if I potentially, some of these are larger contracts, and if I am in the same business, I might want to reach out to Lionel and say, hey, you know, I see you won this contract. If you need somebody to sub or partner with you, I'm ready to go. And here's my capability stack. Okay. And so this is actually going to be for a park, a campground down there for them to actually rent in case of them for this housing mission. So it looks like they're housing some folks down from that hurricane still. Okay. So different types of bids that are out there. And you can find those in our system. And you can also go through and actually look at, for example, a lot of times they're not going to be tied to an individual hurricane, but they do require, for example, some assistance. And just go back in here for debris removal. And I actually had that one in the popular bids area. So we can come in and storm clean up. And very quickly pull those up. You can see those on a map. Geo-based technology. So we're tapping into all of these all over the world. Okay. And so debris removal. See, that's under services, debris removal, disaster recovery. Okay. See them where they're at. Okay. If you're in Norway, this is project over in Norway, just a disaster debris can go in. And you know, if I'm focused in Louisiana, or debris monitoring service down in Florida, construction debris, other types of requirements. Okay, going in and tripping through to the actual bid. This is down in Orange County, Texas. Okay, and stepping through, going in and taking a look at that bid, and then responding to them. Yeah, good question. How to look and see. Okay, and then okay, and so some advertising there from Mr. P. Any more final questions? I appreciate your time today. I thank you for coming. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me. You're at ARC Delivery. Contact information is prominently displayed here. And we're at 800-492-8523, located in Atlanta. Have a great afternoon.